Welcome back to Track Talk. Today we'll be commentating a game of 1830 that was played in the 2026 1830 League. This is the same league that we commentated last year. I'm not doing all the games this year. I'm just doing the games that I played in and probably the final. So it'll be a lot less work for everyone, a lot less content. I'm going to jump right into this game, but I do want to just note that I'm going to be commentating this game as if I was playing it in real time. So I took detailed notes throughout this game, and I'm going to try to use those rather than my recollection of the game. And I'm going to try and avoid spoiling or using my future knowledge of the game outcome or actions that players take so we can experience this game together from my perspective. All right, we're going to jump right in. First thing I notice is that I'm playing against Daroj. He's a good player. He's been on the channel before. He's definitely a concern for me in this game and someone that I don't want to give an inch to. But the saving grace for me is that I'm ahead of him in priority. So any mistakes from other players, I will be able to take advantage of before he has the opportunity to act. And it's also going to be very hard for him to dump companies on him since I control whether or not he operates ahead of me in the stock rounds. M. Gaylor and Dichu are players that I don't know, so I'm entering this game really kind of focused on Daroj, and I don't know what to expect from the other players. M. Gaylor is going to open the game up with a bid on the Mohawk and Hudson, very reasonable. I will go right for the Camden and Amboy. I think this is what we've discussed before. If someone makes a mistake and you happen to be on the Camden and Amboy, there's a chance you could end up with it cheap. So that's my strategy here. Daroj is going to follow up with a D&H. The three kind of desirable privates now all have bids on them, and Dichu will round us out with a bid on the M and H. So from this point, M. Gaylor has a contested private and really no incentive to encourage a pull here since he would have to compete for the M&H and potentially give other players face value privates. But in fact, he bids on the Champlain and St. Lawrence. So that's a massive mistake. It opens me up for an immediate ripcord. I will get the Schuylkill and the Camden Amboy for basically face. Daroj is also coming out looking pretty good with the D and H for face. And M. Gaylor has put himself in a position where he's got a cheap private, the Champlain and St. Lawrence, and then a contested Mohawk and Hudson, which is going to be bid up massively since those are the two players that are going to be in contention from the B&O. So this is inexcusable, just a really poor play right off the start here. With that in mind, I of course take the Schuylkill and will enjoy my face value Camden and Amboy. The problem here is that I know at this stage in the game that I'm going to be recording this video, and now the pressure is really on. I got the dream scenario here, the dream start, face value Camden and Amboy. I may even end up with priority depending on who ends up with the B&O. So if I lose this game from this position, it's going to be a massive embarrassment for me when I have to post this video online. So on the one hand, I'm very glad to be in such a strong position, but on the other hand, I recognize that the pressure is on. Brings us to the M&H. Dichu and M. Gaylor are competing for the B&O presidency here, and as a result, should be incentivized to bid this fairly high. And we will see it go up to 160, which is not an unreasonable price. Dichu does walk away with it. That leaves M. Gaylor to pick up the B&O, which was the risk that we alluded to when he decided to bid on the Champlain at St. Lawrence, and also leaves me with priority, which is what we were mentioning before. So this is the dream start for me, and I need to make sure that I can capitalize on it. M. Gaylor is going to buy the B&O and pars it for 100. I have my choice of companies here, and I'm a little bit worried about a slower game or stall because I'm seeing some relatively low-level play based on that auction. So I'm going to pick the C&O here, which has the highest early revenue. The thinking being that it has the good revenue, so if the game is slow, I can just sit on that revenue and not be punished by the game pace. It also denies the high revenue to Daroj, who has the D&H teleport as an option. And then if someone floats the PRR other than myself, I will still have the opportunity to get the revenue from that one share, but I can deploy my capital elsewhere. So I think my choice here is the C&O. Daroj is going to take the NY&H, reasonable choice. Dichu follows up with the PRR. So this is what I was talking about. The PRR is going to float without my help, but I will be able to harness the revenue from that share or potentially sell that share once it's floated to get some extra liquidity. So I'm happy with the way things are going. M. Gaylor is going to invest in the PRR. That's kind of questionable. Again, The PRR is going to have lower revenue than either the NYNH and the CNO. So if you're M. Gaylor and you're waiting for the BNO to float or waiting to accumulate enough capital to float your own company, I'm not sure that I see the appeal of the PRR as opposed to the CNO or NYNH. I continue to float my CNO. I don't recall the rest of this stock round having much of interest. And CNO is floated, NYNH is floated, PRR is floated. M. Gaylor has invested quite heavily in the PRR relative to the other companies, and he will actually pass there. So he sits on some cash, and the only company he doesn't buy is my company. So looking at this game state here, the only liability that I'm foreseeing for myself as it stands is that the CNO is operating first in priority, just because, or in operating order, just because I part it first. So when it comes time to buy in privates, I may have the dubious honor of having to buy the first three and all the twos to open up the privates for the other players. We'll see if that comes to pass, but that's what I'm considering about here is the operating order. CNO, I'm operating it. I think there's really only one way to play the CNO in the early game, and that's to head to Chicago. So that's what I'll do, buy a single two train. I don't want to, again, push trains if I have the highest revenue and I'm in first in operating order. I'd rather other players do that, and then I can buy my privates much more easily. NYNH also a fairly common opening heading towards the B&M. Probably doesn't want to make the NYC too attractive to the other players, given that he may not be the eventual president of the NYC. Buys a single two, PRR heading east, and buys a two. So a very standard operating round. Now, in this stock round, my concern again is the operating order. So I need to kind of basically find a way to have the CNO operate behind these other companies if at all possible. Daroche has priority, and we'll see what he does before I have my opportunities to act. He's going to buy a PRR. That company's floating up. I'm happy to see that. That will put the PRR in front of the CNO without me having to do anything. Dichu is going to buy a CNO. Makes sense. M. Gaylor, CNO, and then he sells it. So that actually addresses my issue for me. Now I don't have to worry about the CNO's operating order anymore. I pass as a result. Daroche has shares to buy. He picks up the cheap CNO. Dichu, nothing. M. Gaylor is going to now sell down the PRR, which actually is a little bit of a concern for me because, of course, now this company is operating after me. And he will now float the NYC. So this is very questionable, right? He's parring the NYC, which he's losing at least the BNO or the NYC since he can't defend both of them. And he can't par either one of them because his liquidity is split between the two companies. So this is just playing into my theory here that we're going to see a slow game, maybe stuck on three companies for a couple of operating rounds here, which is going to massively benefit the player with the highest revenue, which is me on the CNO. So I'm very happy to see this. I'm not entirely sure why this was the play here, particularly because the NYNH laid towards the B&M. So, you know, it's not like the NYC has a guaranteed run into New York right now. And it's just kind of baffling to me that this is the decision from this player. Daroche is going to buy an NYNH, and it looks like M. Gaylor is going to invest further in the NYC, giving me priority into the next stock round. NYNH is operating first. Going to just sit on track. No sense in laying Providence if he doesn't know he's going to be starting the B&M. Runs for 50. CNO linking up with the Chicago, pays it. PRR lays Lancaster, pays it, and we are going to be back into the stock round. The PRR bought a second two train, which is questionable. It does potentially open up a run to the west for him, but that's only another, I believe, $30. So probably not worthwhile, and it does make it dangerous in the sense that now somebody has the opportunity to buy in their privates. He is operating last, so if one of the other players buys in their privates, it's probably not the end of the world for Dichu. He can still get his private in, but I don't know that that two train necessarily benefits him very much. I have priority here, so my goal is to end up with the CNO last in operating order and also to hopefully end up high in priority so if the privates break, I will be able to have my choice of companies early in next stock round. The danger here is that if I sell the CNO down to operate last, it's possible that one of the other players will be able to operate before me in the stock round and steal the good companies if the privates break. I also need to be a little bit careful that by selling the CNO down here, that I don't leave myself open to a dump from one of these other players if I also buy one of their shares. So specifically, I'm looking at the PRR with two trains. If I were to buy another share there after I sell the CNO, D-Chu in theory could dump that on me. However, if I put the CNO behind the PRR, he's either forced to take an action here, which will change priority to sell his own PRR, or the CNO will be operating last, and it'll be hard for the PRR to completely dump its treasury or deplete its treasury for the dump. So not too worried about taking an action here and potentially losing priority. I think that prioritizing the CNO operating last is important enough that it makes sense. So I buy the PRR and I sell the CNO, and then I'm just hoping that somebody else takes an action like buying a share, which doesn't change the relative operating order, but does preserve my position in priority deal. Darroch is passing. D-Chu neglects to buy the PRR, so this is pretty much ideal for me at this point. I'm early in priority, late in operating order. M. Galler is going to pass, and I pass, and we go into the operating round. I made a little note to myself that I thought that stock round was going to be the deciding point of the game. I think this is a very strong position for me if I'm able to get my privates in here before everybody else. And time will tell if that is, in fact, the deciding factor of the game. N1H is operating first, runs and pays, withholds, probably preparing for the private buy-in. PRR is going to lay Pittsburgh. It's going to run for 60 and pays it. CNO is heading down towards Pittsburgh and onwards to Lancaster. Again, the CNO can struggle if it doesn't get access east, but because the BNO is not going to float until later, and we've had a little bit of a stall in the early operating rounds, I'm not going to be punished for the CNO's early position. I withhold this to get myself yellow and also keep the cash in the company, anticipating buying in the 2s, 3s, and then my privates, which is what we'll see here. So now I'm early in priority. M. Galler has no opportunity to snag a company, and nobody else has bought in their privates. So I'm in a very strong position here. My decisions here are what company to start, and depending on what M. Galler does, if he sits on capital, he may have the option to try and defend one of his companies. If he invests here, I can just steal the other company fairly easily. So he elects to buy the NYC, and that means that the B&O is free for the taking, really not going to be possible for him to defend it. And the B&O is a great company, great treasury. Its only liability is if it gets tokened out at Lancaster, but since I control the CNO, really shouldn't be possible for that to happen. Track Talk buying the B&O. Darroch, not a lot to do there. D-Chu is going to buy an NYNH, which is reasonable. And I think the rest of this stock round is mostly going to be me floating the B&O. M. Galler is going to sell an NYNH and work on floating the NYC, which is mostly irrelevant. I'm buying the B&O. Darroch still passing. M. Galler is dumping the B&O down, hurts my net worth minimally, not a factor. And now I am secure in my steal of this presidency. He floats the NYC. B&O's almost floated. Darroch's sitting on a lot of cash, probably just waiting to see where things end up, hoping to snag a cheap share after people have sold out. I think that CNO is probably looking reasonably attractive. It does have $0, but it has a 3 train, so a couple withholds could fully rejuvenate that company if he wanted to risk the dump. It doesn't look like he's going to do it just yet. And the B&O is now floated. It only has a 40% presidency, so I'm not too worried about how this company operates early on, since I still have a well-performing CNO to bolster my net worth for the next stock round. I sell out of the PRR, just don't want to be dumped on, and I will par the B&M here. And the reason I'm doing this is because I see that Desroches is going to potentially have priority in the next stock round. He has the NY&H. I don't want to allow him to buy in his D&H and then high par the B&M. I'd rather force him, if he wants the B&M, to stay at a low par, which will slow the game down, allow me to rehabilitate my CNO, and potentially win this game late with a yellow strategy since I have 5 yellow shares already. So at this point in the game, I don't really care if I maintain the presidency of the B&M. I am just trying to deny a high par of the last viable company, saying that the CPR and Erie aren't very viable. To any of the other players. It does cost me, a fair chunk of my liquidity and net worth, but that's a price I'm willing to pay to really just kind of constrict this game state and limit the actions the other players have available to them. So that leaves me last in priority, but I'm still very happy with how the game state is evolving, and we'll be operating the B&O for the first time. So the B&O has to decide how to lay track here. The options are to head towards the east, towards Atlantic City, and eventually into Philadelphia, or to head north into Lancaster. The issue with heading to Lancaster, although that's where I'd like to go, is that it's very easy for the PRR to block the B&O and spite it with bad track. And really, that's the probably logical thing for it to do. So I'm going to assume that I'll be blocked at Lancaster and instead will lay towards Atlantic City, hoping to get into Philadelphia next time. My next decision is whether or not to buy a 3 or to buy a 2 out of the CNO to shuffle cash around, rehabilitate the CNO, and hopefully dodge the 3s. I think in the end that's probably a little bit too greedy. There's a good chance that I will have a decent 3 run the next operating round, and I definitely don't want either of my companies to fall back by not having a 3 when these 4s come out. So angling for the first 4 purchase is just too narrow of a window for me to aim for. So I do buy a 3 here. NYC's first operation is heading south. No surprises there. No guarantees it gets into New York, but reasonable to attempt it. Buying in the Champlain and St. Lawrence. Could have done that in 4.2 and gotten a few extra bucks for his personal treasury. PRR is going to upgrade Philadelphia, and interestingly, upgrades it in a way that prevents me from running into Philadelphia in the next operating round, but also in a way that really kind of kills Lancaster, since this 00 is never going to upgrade to run into New York now. So this to me is a little bit of a short-sighted play. Yes, you deny the B&O player a little bit of revenue for a couple operating rounds, but you also are the PRR player, and you've just really killed your access into New York. Now you're going to be forced to run into those double dits to get into New York, which is going to make any late game run you have, unless you're running a D train, much less lucrative. So I'm not a fan of this decision. I think this is something that trips up a lot of people, and I think you just have to kind of hold your nose and lay the friendly Philadelphia track so that you can hope for better late game runs. Regardless, the decision is what it is. He's going to have to token somewhere if he wants to take advantage of that Philadelphia run. So we do see the Lancaster token, and he pays it out. I will note that if I had laid towards Lancaster instead of towards Atlantic City, I think we would just see him upgrade Lancaster instead of Philadelphia. So I don't think that I had any other real counterplay to what he's done here. I think his move was contingent on my move, which is fair. He buys a 3, doesn't buy in any privates. NY&H is up. He's going to lay Providence. I believe he has priority. He does. So he's telegraphing that maybe he wants to float the B&M. Again, this is why I parred the B&M at such a low par, to kind of neuter this synergy that he's set up for. He's going to token it even, and will run his single train for 50, buys the 3. That's 1 3 left on the market, or in the depot. Buys a second 3. Pretty aggressive, but with that token, I think you do have to take advantage of that opportunity cost of laying that token with pretty aggressive train buys. CNO laying towards Pittsburgh. So now my goal is with my 2 companies to double token in Pittsburgh and preserve my B&O runs in the late game in that direction, as opposed to potentially through Lancaster. It is going to be a little bit of a fraught situation. There's no guarantee that the B&O gets into Pittsburgh. It's reliant on, let me look at this hex coordinate, H14 being upgradable once I15 is upgraded to have an outlet here. So it's going to be at least 2 track points before I can guarantee this token in Pittsburgh. And the PRR, if they're paying attention, may have something to say about this. They already have decent revenue as a result of the Philadelphia upgrade. It would make a lot of sense for them to next upgrade H14 to try and prevent any shenanigans in cooperation between my two companies. C&O has a bunch of trains, but doesn't have money for a token, so isn't going to be able to take full advantage of all those trains. And I don't imagine we're going to be seeing those 2 trains last, given that now the 4 is facing the other players. So no token, just running trains, pay for 130. I do have to decide whether or not I want to pay or withhold here. Obviously, the C&O is quite a liability here because it doesn't have any money, and I have 2 companies. Which will need trains. But the danger with withholding is that if I decide I do want to keep that B&M presidency, if I withhold too much on the C&O and then sell it down to fund the float of the B&M, I'm going to be putting the C&O into brown for the other players, which is a disaster. Also, keeping the cash in the company is going to make it harder for me to float that B&M. Again, I'm not sure that I actually want to keep the B&M presidency. I really just floated it to deny it to Daroge. But having 3 companies with one of them in the yellow is a pretty strong position in the game. So I want to keep my options open. Also, because the B&O's runs have been kind of neutered here with this Philadelphia lay, if I don't pay here, I'm going to have very little cash in the next stock round. I want to be clear, I still think my position in this game is extraordinarily strong. I'm not worried, but I'm just explaining why I'm deciding to play the C&O the way I do. B&O is up again. I upgrade Baltimore, and I'm hoping again that the C&O is allowed to upgrade H14 so that I can double token in Pittsburgh in the next operating round. We'll see what the PRR has to say about that. It's really out of my control. B&O is running for piddling 60, pays it out. I buy in my last private. That will give me a few extra bucks for the stock round. NYC, no run available to it, heads towards New York. So we'll have guaranteed access there now, but no guarantees that it gets it for free. We'll probably instead have to pay the $80 upgrade. I think I neglected to note that he hadn't bought a train last time. So this will be him rusting the 2s with his first train purchase. He does lay the Champlain and St. Lawrence token to break the CPR suitcase, and the 2s rust. PRR upgrades Lancaster. I think this is a mistake. I think H14 is the more important upgrade to deny the B&O access. The Lancaster upgrade is going to net him an extra $10. It wasn't being threatened by either of my companies, and it's just not a really timely upgrade, I guess. It's reasonable, of course. You're going to want to upgrade it eventually for access into New York, but the priority here was cutting off the B&O, not increasing your run by $10. Pays for 90 and is able to buy in his private, so we'll have a good amount of cash in the next stock round. NYNH upgrades Baltimore, does increase his revenue, and he doesn't have to pay the $80 fee to run out of New York with this. So he'll have good revenue on the NYNH, and he decides to pay it. Does have a private he can buy in still, so should be doing that. He does. C&O now. This is kind of the dream scenario for me. I'm going to lay H14 to link the B&O in. I'll token Pittsburgh with the C&O, and then the B&O, as long as it operates before PRR, will be guaranteed the double token in Pittsburgh. And if we look at the operating order here, it's going to be difficult for the B&O to operate behind the PRR. It's possible. Dichu could invest quite heavily in the B&O and trash it down to 67, but it seems unlikely. He doesn't have enough liquidity, and also there's going to be a big opportunity cost to him to do that, since it will prevent him from getting his choice of the next par of a company. So pretty likely, because of the H14 upgrade here when the C&O, that the B&O is going to be tokening at Pittsburgh as well. CNO tokens in Pittsburgh, not just to guarantee the double token, but also to improve its run, of course. Now it can reach Philadelphia and Lancaster. So it will run for 90 and it pays out again. This leaves the CNO ledged, so I can sell out of it without hurting my net worth if I want, and it's also very easily to withhold a couple times back into yellow if players invest heavily into this company, so this is a pretty flexible position. That's a funny thing to say. I suppose being ledged is, by definition, not flexible. It's an inflexible position, but it has some benefits in this situation. That will conclude that operating round, and we are into stock round 5. Daroge is leading us off. All the players have a fair amount of liquidity. That's inaccurate. Daroge and Dichu have a fair amount of liquidity. Myself and M. Gaylor are trailing, not in terms of game position in my case, but just in terms of options in the stock round, because I'm a stock round ahead of the other players in my private company buy. So I think the key thing from my perspective here is, what does Daraj do? Does he try and float the B&M? Does he float one of these other companies? To a lesser extent, what does Dichu do? I don't think Dichu is as incentivized to float the B&M as Daraj would have been, just because he doesn't control the NYNH. So my curiosity is what these other players are going to do, and then I'll probably just be buying paying shares. I'm not intending to float the B&M unless someone floats it for me. So Daroge is going to sell out of the PRR and the CNO and par the Erie. The Erie, I said it was dead before. It's not technically dead. It just needs a lot of help from the other player, from the other player's company, to develop track. And it is kind of dead until Brown, at least. So reasonable, certainly much better than CPR. Whether or not it's better than the B&M, unclear to me. Dichu is also selling out, and he's going to par the CPR. I think this is less unambiguously bad compared to the B&M. I think the B&M, although it has a low par, has a much better map position and long-term potential. Also, he wasn't even able to max par the CPR, so the difference between the CPR and the B&M in this situation is even less. If he was able to max par the CPR and suitcase it, that's a totally different story, but that's not the situation here. M. Gaylor is going to buy the NYNH. And myself, I'm going to just buy paying shares as previously noted, unless someone pressures the B&M, in which case I'll be in a position to decide whether or not to defend or just to dump it on the other player. Daroge continuing to float, Dichu floating, M. Gaylor is going to buy my CNO. Buying it from the IPO. I'm anticipating withholding on the CNO pretty heavily, so I don't care too much if it comes from the market or the IPO. I'm just going to be leaving the B&O to be my revenue generator for this next operating round. Buying the PRR, need to be a little bit careful about opening myself up to dumps here. Dichu does have a very high likelihood of operating ahead of me in the next stock round, so I need to be just cautious. Right now, safe, but another share purchase would be questionable. Erie and CPR continuing to float. M. Gaylor's out of cash. I will buy the NYNH, which also is in theory leaving me open to a dump. However, it should be very hard for Daroge to have priority on me in the next stock round. So I feel more secure in opening myself up to a dump on the NYNH than I do on the PRR. Also, the NYNH's revenue is going to be much higher than the PRR's. So unless he starts withholding on the NYNH, this is just a more attractive investment. Question for myself at this stage is whether or not I sell a share in the CNO to buy some B&O. I would have to sell more than one, but the B&O is going to be paying and the CNO is going to be withholding, so that is an attractive opportunity. I would, in theory, open myself up to losing control of the CNO if I were to do that, which is the big downside. Daroge nearly floated. Dichu, same story. M. Gaylor and myself are passing. Erie is floated. CPR is floated. So at this point, I've basically lost my opportunity to invest further in the B&O, and I'll just have to be okay with withholding on 5 shares in the CNO. It's certainly inefficient, not something I'd love to see, but the risk of losing control of the CNO was too high for me to sell out of it. Daroge is going to sell one of his Eries and change operating order. Presumably, he's just doing this to buy paying shares, not because he's overly concerned about the operating order at this stage, and he buys my B&O. We're into operating round 5. I am first up on the B&O. As noted, nobody was able to change the relative operating order of the B&O versus the PRR, which was highly unlikely. That does mean the B&O is scot-free into Pittsburgh. So now the B&O is a great company again, and this track on Philadelphia becomes totally irrelevant, which is what we discussed earlier. This also really hurts the PRR's long-term potential. Sure, you can get into New York, but now you're kind of trapped in the East. Um, runs and pays as predicted. CPR is heading down towards the Albany track since the NYNH has thrown away its token on Providence, will not have the opportunity to token out on Albany. So CPR has guaranteed access into New York here, which is very nice for that company. I think when I was evaluating the CPR versus the B&M, I was kind of neglecting that this track had been laid to allow for easy access into New York. So that does make the CPR certainly a little bit more attractive than I may have commented during the stock round. He's going to buy a 4. Erie is up and is going to actually set himself up for a suitcase. I did not really anticipate this development, and I'm not sure that it's the right move. NYNH has 2-3 trains. We're not really even close to getting to the 5s. He could withhold on the NYNH once and really be in quite a good position treasury-wise for permanent trains. So I don't know that he necessarily needs to protect himself against the train rush by suitcasing the Erie. And I also don't know that this game is going to develop fast enough that he's going to be able to get Brown track in any reasonable time to get this second 00 run if his intention is not to suitcase the Erie. So this is a big question mark for me. I don't know if that's the right move. NYNH running and pays out, so no withhold. As a minority investor, I'm cheering him on. Yes, full steam ahead. PRR, probably regretting losing out on this token in Pittsburgh. Can lay into Reading and Allentown into New York, but New York isn't even upgraded yet, so probably a little bit sad about how things have developed here. Also doesn't have a run into Baltimore because I was able to lay H14. So yeah, not great for him. Lays Reading and Allentown and runs and pays for 100. CNO is going to start heading up towards the 00s. I've recognized this potential for a suitcase from Desroches, and I want to make sure that I control whether or not this suitcase is viable, not him. So with 2 track points between the CNO and the BNO versus the Erie's 1 track point, if I get close enough before Brown occurs, I'm going to have the ability to determine how this track develops and whether or not he's able to suitcase that company. So also, I just don't have much else track to lay. I could, in theory, start setting myself up for runs west, so I don't have to run through Cleveland and instead can hit Columbus and Chicago, and that would be reasonable to do, but that's not really time sensitive, whereas this development on the 00s is potentially time sensitive. Also, the token on Rochester is potentially of value, so I want to start heading in this direction instead. Withholding on the CNO, again, my goal is to take this company yellow for the rest of the game, just to win this game late on share density. It also reduces my liability when the train rush occurs. MGaler's up on the NYC, doesn't have too many options here. Could, in theory, lay up to the CPR to give himself runs, but CPR's only option is to lay that track, so you might as well let him lay it for you. It is painful to pay the $80 for the NYC run, but, what were you expecting when you parred the NYC? He lays the upgrade. First run on the NYC is going to be for $80, and he pays it out. 5.2 is up. B&O, not a whole lot in terms of track for it to do, so I'm just going to head up towards the 00s further and just make sure that I have my opportunity for input on how this track develops. Same run, going to pay it. CPR gets into Albany, can't upgrade or token just yet, but will next operating round, and there's nothing anybody can do about it. He pays out. Erie, again, doesn't have to buy a train and is suitcasing, which is questionable. NYNH is upgrading Albany, does give him potentially a little bit better revenue rather than running into Providence. But actually, now that I think about that, it doesn't at all. Providence upgrade would have been better, but I think probably he lacks these K tracks he needs. Let's just confirm. He does. Okay. The Providence upgrade would have been better, but he didn't have that opportunity. I think in this case, if you don't have that opportunity, you probably just don't lay any track. Why do the dirty work for the other players? Um, so his run is 190 there. His run was 170 the other way. So I guess he does get a little extra money that way. All right. Regardless, paying it, and PRR is up. No track for the PRR as a result of my tokens, and runs and pays for 100. NYC doesn't have any track really either. Could, in theory, start heading over to Rochester. I think that's probably not a huge priority, but well, I guess in retrospect, actually, it is probably worth considering. He can't guarantee he gets this New York token and runs into Baltimore, or sorry, Boston. So maybe trying to get into Rochester is a viable alternative. Going to lay track into Reading and Allentown and hope that the Philadelphia upgrade is friendly to him. Not unreasonable to try it, but it is a little bit of a double-edged sword. It's very unpredictable who gets this upgrade and how it eventually upgrades. So it's also unpredictable who gets the relevant token. So if you lose out on this token, you may have just opened up a double run into New York for another player. Now, if it works out and you get that token, great, but no guarantees. So that's the risk there. Going to run for 140 and pays it. So, laying into the 00. So now I have the opportunity to determine how this upgrades. Can't run into the second 00 from here, but I can lay some gentle upgrade here to get even more control of this track. It also gives me a 3 run from Baltimore into Dunkirk, which is going to be better than my existing run. So I run it for 120 and I withhold. So now I'm yellow. The CNO's treasury is looking pretty good, and I should have plenty of cash into the stock round, and I already have a share lead. Stock round 6. At this stage in the game, I'm still feeling very confident. You can see that I've got a healthy share lead. My liquidity into this stock round is only minimally below the other players, and I love my map position. We'll see if the other players force me to float the B&M or not. Otherwise, I'm happy to continue sitting on it and just buy paying shares. Dichu is up. He buys the B&O. That company's been paying out, and it has some arbitrage value, IPO to market, so reasonable purchase. It is rather expensive compared to the other companies, but not unreasonable by any means. M. Gaylor, this is inexcusable. Buying the Erie, which literally does not have runs. There's no reason to do this, and there's a high likelihood that this company is eventually sold down. Just kind of crazy purchase. The Track Talk, buying the NYC, has very high revenue, no risk of a dump, and it's a relatively cheap share compared to these other companies. Seems like a good purchase. Deroge is going to buy the NYC as well. Dichu buying the NYC. Everybody's on the same opinion on that company. M. Geller buying the CPR. Again, one of the more expensive companies, one of the lower revenues. Now, this revenue is misleading because it will get into New York this operating round, so probably going to be better. Probably will have the same revenue as the NYC, actually. So not unreasonable to buy this company, but should have happened last go around in this stock round as opposed to this Erie purchase. Track Talk buying the NYC. This company is, in theory, a dump risk because he's right ahead of me in terms of a priority deal, but he only has one company, so it's going to be hard for him to really deplete this treasury. Feeling secure there. Deroge is going to buy the B&O. Reasonable. That company is going to continue to pay. CNO is going to continue to withhold. Dichu's out of money. M. Galler also out of money now after buying the B&O. And now I have to decide if I am happy with the status quo or if I want to kind of reinvest my portfolio in any way. I decide to pass. Deroge is going to buy the CNO, and he buys it off of the market. That company's withholding, so I'm not too upset about losing my market shares. And this does pull me further back in priority. I have to decide here if I want to do anything else, and I decide to pass. Darroch sells the CNO, which kind of throws me off. He wasn't in any danger for owning that, and it's just a good long-term investment. So I wasn't really sure what to make of this, and is also going to sell out of the NYC to start investing further in the BNO. I am noting that nobody's forcing this B&M presidency, so I'm happy to see that and just sit pretty on that presidency for now. That said, now Darroch is sold out quite heavily, so now I'm worried that he is going to force this presidency, which is going to force me to decide whether or not to defend it. And I think that you can go either way in that decision. So we'll see what Darroch does. He is going to pass for now, and then he does start buying the B&M. So now I'm under the gun and I have to decide whether or not to defend it. Again, I think you can go either way. As it stands, if I lose the B&M presidency, I think I'm in a good position. The map position of the B&O and the CNO is strong. I'm going to have a share advantage no matter what because the CNO is deeply yellow and I'm heavily invested in it. I already have a share advantage. So I think you could make the argument that losing the B&M is no real harm. The B&M's map position is underwhelming. It's additional train liability with that low treasury. But ultimately, I decide that I'm going to keep the presidency of the B&M and defend it. As you can see, I've sold out of the NYC and will be investing that money in the B&M. And I think my reasoning here is that with 3 companies, I just don't think there's any way for me to lose the game. I just have enough map control, enough control of the train purchases. The Erie is suitcased and basically dead in the water at this point. If I have 3 companies and this game goes late with me in yellow already, I just think that there's no losing the game. So if I give the B&M to Darroch, who knows? Maybe he's able to figure out something to do with it and push trains and I don't know, someone bankrupts or I lose the game that way. That's my thinking at this point, at least, and that's my justification for trying to defend the B&M. So I buy the B&M. Darroch is going to continue to pressure. And now the B&M is floated. It's here that I'm starting to realize my error. I sold out of the NYC, but I really should have sold the PRR. Selling the PRR times 2 would have given me the money for 3 shares of the B&M and leaves me the higher paying NYC shares. Now, to get to 5 shares and fully protect this company, I'm going to have to sell both the NYC and the PRR, which is obviously inefficient and suboptimal. So Darroch is going to continue pressuring, force me to buy that 5th share, and I am forced to sell out of the PRR, which is not what I wanted to do. B&M is now protected, but I did have a error in my play in terms of how I defended the B&M. Darroch sees that the B&M is now defended, but will invest further. And Dichu is now selling out of shares as well, which is confusing to me. So now the stock round has gotten kind of chaotic, and I'm not really sure what's going on. I'm not in danger on the B&M anymore, but I see a lot of people kind of selling out of their companies. And that leads me to feel secure in buying a CNO share with my residual capital, right? 3 players have enough money for shares. Everybody's selling out of stuff. I'm not too worried about losing priority here, or at least going last in priority if I buy the CNO. So I buy the CNO, and then everyone passes, which puts me in a really rough spot. And the reason I say this is because now I'm last in priority, and this dump on the NYNH is definitely a possibility. So what can I do about it? Basically nothing. I mean, I could sell out of an NYNH, but I've already had to sell out of all my paying shares. I'm withholding on the CNO. The B&M is not going to run. I only have a 4-share investment in the B&O. If I sell out of the NYNH, that's kind of limiting my revenue in this next operating round. So I decided to play greedy, and I basically just say, well, okay, everybody's sitting on cash. I will be the only player that's fully vested, and I'm going to risk this NYNH dump by passing here. So that was a very important stock round with a lot of key decisions that I made and some pretty big errors on my end. Buying that CNO was a mistake. In my defense, I really didn't expect other players to pass there. I didn't think it would cost me priority. And then the order which I sold the NYC and the PRR was clearly suboptimal. But it does leave me with three companies. I'm still feeling okay. B&O's treasury is healthy. B&M's treasury is reasonable, and then the CNO is halfway to a private train or permanent train. So I figured to myself, if I get another couple withholds on the CNO, I'll be sitting pretty, and this game will be a cakewalk. NYH is up and is going to put D20 down. Again, probably seeing that somebody needs to get over to Rochester to help out the Erie. Unfortunately for the NYH, he's going to be not the player to do it since he threw away his token on Providence, and CPR is going to immediately token in Albany, you have to assume. The consequence here is that I really wanted this D20 token or tile for E13, and there's only one of them. So I'm not going to be able to get the B&O and the CNO into this double O like I had intended. Instead, I'm going to have to get into Rochester first and then over to the double O's. That leaves me vulnerable to a token in Rochester, and it also costs me some track points to get over to where I was going to go. I don't know if this was intentional from Desroches to deny me this tile. I imagine it wasn't, but it does affect my strategy. He runs for 190 and is still paying. Not at all concerned about the impending 5 trains. CPR is going to lay C19. Also potentially interested in getting over to Rochester, I suppose. Tokens in Albany, as we expected, and its run is now going to be 140, the same as the NYC's. PRR, really no options for it, just going to be running and paying. B&O heading up towards Rochester, again as a consequence of this D20 track. Not interested in really tokening Rochester, would rather just see how things develop. If I get tokened out at Rochester, it's not the end of the world. And I'd rather preserve that token to see if I can get the token somewhere more impactful. Running for 120, I pay it. And I will note that the B&O now has 4 shares in the market, so I'm getting 80% of that revenue, which is going to really help me, in terms of this impending train rush. B&M doesn't lay any track for now. Again, this Providence track is unavailable. And now I need to decide what to do. The way the B&M floated has put me in a little bit of a bind. If I buy a 4 here, Desroches has a very healthy treasury in Erie. He can snap up the 4 and the 5. And then NYC is going to get a 5. Maybe the CNO can get a 5. But where do my other permanent trains come from? If I buy a 4 on the B&M, I'm only going to have $300 left in this treasury for the eventual 6 or D train. So that is a liability here. I also need to be very careful that if trains rush here, that I don't get this NY&H dumped on me because of my kind of kerfluffle in the last stock round. I've left myself open to that. So this is the part of the game where I feel, for the first time, very nervous about my position. I'm realizing how badly I played the last stock round and what a kind of tenuous position I've put myself in, which is unfortunate because I had such a strong start to this game and I've been feeling so confident. Now I'm starting to realize that I really misplayed the last stock round and gave myself a hard situation to deal with. My strategy ends up being that I need to save myself from the dump. So I think that I'm going to basically e-buy a 5 train. And by emergency buying a train, I can force myself to sell a share. I'll sell the NY&H share, and that will save me from the dump. So my strategy specifically is to buy a train out of the CNO for exactly 107. That way I can emergency buy the 5 train into the CNO to sell an NY&H and save myself from the dump. So basically, I'm going to buy the 4, and then I'll buy the train out of the CNO for a specific amount of money, assuming that Erie is going to buy the 4 and the 5, NYC is going to buy a 5, and then I can emergency buy a 5 into the now trainless CNO for exactly the right amount of money to sell an NY&H. So that's my strategy here. And I think it's pretty clever. I think, okay, problem solved. I've just protected myself from the dump. I end up with a permanent train in one of my companies, and my other 2 companies won't really be in too much trouble for their other permanent trains. Buy the 4, buy the 3 train from the CNO as just explained, And now we go on to the Erie. And this is where it gets interesting. So Erie still doesn't have any track available because it's not brown yet. He buys the 4. And now this is where the interesting thing happens. He buys a 3 out of the NYNH. And I'm not really sure why he does this. The NYNH, you know, doesn't really need $70 specifically for anything that I can see. It doesn't have any cash that it's going to spend on track. It doesn't have any tokens, and it doesn't get it really meaningfully closer to a permanent train. It does mean that when he buys the 5, he discards the 3. And my thinking here is, wow, Darrow's just next leveled me. He's going to prevent me from emergency buying the 5 train into the C&O because now there's a 3 train in the depot. And that is a huge, huge problem for me because I thought I was going to save myself from the dump, but now I'm screwed. So now I'm really recalculating, but we'll get to that in a moment because it gets even worse. The NYC has access to brown track, and I was completely blind to the potential here, but the NYC saw it right away, which I have to give M. Gaylor credit for. He's been playing pretty poorly this entire game, but he immediately capitalizes on this opportunity, and he upgrades Philadelphia and tokens it so that he is able to get himself potential double runs into New York. And even more catastrophically, because he's in Philadelphia, he has 2 more tokens. He could even token in Lancaster, which would really, really hurt both the B&O and the C&O's runs. So this is the doomsday scenario for me. I went from feeling like I was on top of the world to, wow, I'm about to bankrupt and lose this game in stunning fashion. We see the token as expected. The NYC is in a great position on the map now. Just needs F18 to upgrade on a tight curve here so that he can get the double runs into New York. And he's going to have beautiful runs for the rest of the game. So really heads up play from M. Gaylor there. I have to give him credit for that. He runs for exactly enough, 150, to buy the 5 train. And he's now set. And I'm screwed because, as noted, I don't have the opportunity to emergency buy the 5 like I expected. So now I need to really think on my feet and figure out what to do. So I thought about this for a long time as I was playing the game, and my strategy ends up being very similar to what my initial strategy was. I'm going to save myself from the NYNH dump by forcing myself to emergency buy a train and selling an NYNH share. The only factor is now I don't do it with a 5 train, I have to do it with a 6 train, and I've cost myself runs on the C&O by buying the train into the B&M. So I'm going to have to cost myself yet more runs by shuffling trains around. What I end up doing here is I will buy a 4 train out of the B&M, give the B&M just enough money to emergency buy the 6 with the sale of an NYNH, and then I will rust the 3 on the B&M when the B&O runs so that the B&M is forced to buy that train. I also need to keep in mind the potential for the NYC token in Lancaster, and I need to leave myself enough money in one of my companies to token in Lancaster to prevent that possibility. Now, which company tokens there, the C&O or the B&O, is up for debate at this stage. A token there is going to hurt one of my company's late games runs because it's going to deny them runs into New York, but that's just a sacrifice I need to make to preserve the other company. All right, so C&O upgrades Pittsburgh and is going to buy a train out of the B&M, the 4 train specifically. And I've done this math specifically to ensure I can emergency buy a train. And we are into the next operating round. NYC gets upgraded by the NYNH. This company, it runs and pays out. I have to assume he's planning on dumping on me, so no sense in withholding. PRR does have access to brown train, brown track, and upgrades Lancaster. He's going to pay it as well. The CPR shuffled and is now able to buy the last 5 train. He upgrades Albany. So everything is going according to plan so far, given that I've gotten screwed on how everything evolved in this operating round, but at least my salvage plan is working. B&O is up laying towards the double O's again, just to have the opportunity to break the Erie suitcase. I run my train and buy the 6. That means that the B&M doesn't have a train and upgrades Boston. I have a 6 train. The other players in this position only have 5 trains, so I'm not going to lay Boston friendly where they can run from New York and bypass this DIT. Instead, I'm going to lay it so that I can run easily into the offboard with my 6 if needed. I sell the NYH, so I'm safe now, and I buy the B&M. It's 6 trains. So I have 2 permanent trains, 3 companies. Still in a little bit of danger. I need to make sure that the CNO has enough time to withhold with its 4 train before I need to buy a D train. But now that I'm not at risk of being dumped on, I think my position in this game is a lot stronger. Erie is going to upgrade the 00, but because of all the prep work I've done, I'm going to get to determine how this upgrades. So I don't have to worry too much about the Erie becoming a powerhouse. He doesn't token, which I think is a mistake. NYC 2 trains is going to have a massive, massive run, but this shouldn't last for that long because the D train is probably going to be brought out soon. He upgrades D18 here, which I think is a reflection of the fact that the F18 upgrade wouldn't do much for him because the CPR tokened in New York, so he can't run through it. If he was able to get the run or the token in New York, he would have probably upgraded F18, but as it stands, it's kind of a moot point. Runs his 2 trains for a massive $400 and pays it out. The CNO has $300 and still needs a permanent train, so we'll be withholding not only to stay orange, but also to finance its eventual permanent train. Upgrades Hamilton and Toronto, and we'll be tokening it just to cut off the Erie at the knees. Again, Desroges was the opponent I was most worried about in this game. He may not be in the best position at this part in the game, but now I've basically assured his demise by killing a huge chunk of his portfolio. I need to seal the deal by making sure he doesn't get runs down in Pittsburgh, but by bracketing him with a token and hopefully a bad upgrade on this DIT, I can make the Erie a very unattractive company for the rest of the game. All right, I paid out. For some reason, I thought I was going to withhold there, but I guess I was worried about my position into the next stock round. That brings us to the stock round. Desroges, as noted, has priority. However, does not have the opportunity to dump the N1H on me due to my kind of desperate save in the last operating round. I am interested in just paying shares at this point. The NYC is obviously the most attractive company with a $400 revenue. I do need to be worried about operating order a little bit in terms of the D train upgrade, but looking around the table, it doesn't look like anybody's particularly close to the D train upgrade. And I have 3 companies, so if I want it, I should be able to withhold on all 3 of them and bring it out earlier than any other player. Desroges is going to buy the CNO. I'm not sure that that's necessarily a priority, but since there are 3 shares of the NYC and M. Gaylor cannot buy one, he's guaranteed to get at least 1 NYC share, and he may have missed out on a CNO if he hadn't bought it there. Chu buys the NYC. M. Gaylor is going to buy a CPR. CPR does have access to New York and a permanent train. It's reasonable to purchase that. It's not a dump risk, so fair enough. I will buy the NYC, has the highest revenue. Desroges is going to go back for his NYC. Chu, Erie, that doesn't make much sense to me. That company is not going to be having good runs, but it is not really a dump risk either, so I suppose that's a consideration. M. Gaylor is buying the CNO. That company is going to be floating up now, reasonable to buy the yellow shares. My last share is going to be a CPR, not a dump risk, so it feels secure there. Desroges buying the CPR. That company's floating up. Chu, B&O. That company is in theory a dump risk, not as it stands because there's 3 market shares, but he needs to be a little bit careful that he doesn't hold that for too long if other people invest. He immediately sells it. M. Gaylor passing on a ton of cash. Track Talk passing. Desroges buying the B&O. Chu passing. M. Gaylor passing, and I pass. That brings us to the operating round. So my major liability here is when this D train comes out, I'm not feeling like I'm going to bankrupt anymore, and I do think that I win this game if it goes late. So I just need to make sure that I'm in a good position for the D train. Don't give myself any further train liability with the dump, and also that I don't allow the NYC player to get a token into Lancaster and screw all my companies. PRR is up, upgrades Baltimore, tokens in Philadelphia. Not a huge problem for me since the B&O is going to token in Lancaster, so the C&O wasn't going to have access to that anyways. And yeah, just not a relevant token. Pays it out. NYNH, not a whole lot of track left for the NYNH in this game, so just going to lay something random. Pays for 180, CPR, gets into Rochester, doesn't have token money, but that does eventually potentially cut my run for the C&O into these double O's. Runs for 200 and pays it. B&O has the token money, so just going to basically work on cutting off the Erie, preventing it from getting any decent runs, and tokening in Lancaster to preserve the C&O and B&O runs. Paying out 280. Again, 70% of the revenue is coming to me, so no reason to withhold on the B&O. I'll have plenty of opportunity to withhold on my two trailing companies. Erie, trying to get runs into the DIT and then potentially into Pittsburgh, or potentially looping around into the second double O, but that will be very easy with my track points to cut off, so the Erie is a dead letter, which was intentional. NYC, 2 runs. Again, 2 runs on this company is pretty nasty, but M. Gaylor has not really played well in this game, so he's not someone that I'm overly worried about running away with the game. And what I recognize is that he has a dump risk here from D. Chu. So this CPR company, he needs to be careful that he doesn't end up with his presidency. And if the D train gets pushed, the CPR could potentially be his presidency in the near future. He's not laying any track, and he withholds. Again, I think this is because he realizes that this CPR may be coming his way in the near future. So he wants to have 2 trains to cover that liability. I think if he wasn't at the risk of the dump, it makes no sense to withhold here. Just run your train until someone rusts on you and you might be in a winning position. Otherwise, the withhold is reasonable. I upgrade Providence finally, and I'm going to run my 6 train. I have a split presidency here, so I really need to make sure that I start withholding on the B&M rather than the C&O. And then the B&M will be my yellow company, and the C&O will be my company that I pay out on. For this operation, I do pay out on the B&M, and that's solely to guarantee that both of my companies operate ahead of the NYC. That way, when the NYC potentially gets the D train upgrade, I will still have a run on both of these companies. C&O laying towards Erie just so to set up the B&O to kill the Erie run. I pay it out. 7.2 PRR. PRR bites the bullet and lays the expensive track to break out of the stranglehold I put him in at Pittsburgh. I don't think this is a very meaningful track. It doesn't get him anywhere exciting. But it does kind of telegraph the CPR dump. Like, you're not going to be throwing away $120 if you're facing a D train on your company. He's going to withhold. And the NYNH is up. Nothing track-wise, just pays it. CPR. Links in to cooperate with the PRR, but again, I'm not sure that this track has much significance. I am interested, from my perspective, in shutting down any potential loop through F12, so I definitely don't want a D train on the PRR running from New York into Lancaster, into Dunkirk, and then up through Rochester, and then potentially, I don't know, to ports unknown. So I am going to focus on killing this track when I have the opportunity. CPR pays. B&O is going to for sure kill the Erie and just put that company out of contention for the rest of the game. So I do that and I pay 280 on the B&O. Erie stuck, no actions for the rest of the game other than to pay for 100. B&M is going to run for 190 and I paid out still. I'm realizing at this stage that if the NYC is going to do the dirty work of rusting his 4-train, I am under no compunction to assist. So I'm just going to set up for high revenue in this operating round, pay out on all my companies, and then I will buy the D train in the next operating round after I've had the opportunity to buy a bunch of paying shares in this stock round. And this is just playing in towards my long-term goal of winning this game on share density. Basically, I just want as many paying shares as possible. CNO has the opportunity to kill this loop that I was worried about, so I take it and I pay for 170. NYC is going to lay no track and will withhold one more time for the D train upgrade as expected. So 4 trains are no more, but the B&O and the B&M still have runs before the CNO has to buy a train. NYNH, same track. CPR, really kind of meaningless upgrades here. Runs for 200. And the CPR has flip-flopped with the PRR in operating order because the PRR withheld. I didn't comment on that, but this is just showing that D2 is in fact going to dump the CPR. B&O is now heading towards the west, recognizes that eventually my D run is going to require access to Chicago, so might as well set up for it now. Pays it. PRR is trainless. We'll buy the train out of the CPR. And the CPR is now guaranteed dump. Erie, also trainless from Desroges. He's going to have to sell shares and buy the D train. CNO is going to buy the train out of the B&O to consolidate all the cash into the B&O. So the B&O is halfway to a D train. That's no problem with $800 in my treasury. And the the CNO falling back also is relevant because it puts me back into yellow with one share sell. So I can still continue to exceed my cert limit very easily. B&M paying. Again, I'm eventually going to want to swap these companies where the B&M is the one withholding since it's a split presidency. But now that Desroges has sold out of it, it's more attractive to pay anyways. NYC does have a pretty nice run with 2 trains still, but remember, one of these trains is going to the CPR very soon. So running for 360 and pays it. Stock round 8. Everyone has a ton of cash, but there is a lot of train liability that has not been met. So D2 currently on the hook for a D train. That'll soon be M. Galler, and then myself on the hook for a D train. If we look at the net worths here, remove $500 from my net worth, that'll put me at 2,100, but I won't have to sell any shares to do it. In fact, I will have cash to buy additional shares here. Desroges is 2 shares behind me, won't be picking up really any shares in this stock round, so that gap is going to increase. But more importantly, his Erie is a dead letter, so a big part of his portfolio is just not very exciting. So Desroges won't be winning this game. M. Galler has decent prospects actually, despite the withholds, is not trailing too far in net worth. And again, my net worth is inflated because I have not funded my last permanent train. So really, he's in probably second place here. Does have decent runs on both of his companies and is trailing in shares. So his big liability is that he doesn't have enough shares, and we'll have to find a way to address that if he wants to win. And then D2, I think this is where D2 loses the game. So while yes, he avoids the liability of buying a train, a permanent train, by dumping the CPR, look at what happens with the shares here. He is 8 shares behind me, and our net worths are even. So even if I fund my D train and lose $500, there's no way that D2 is going to come back in 8 share deficit late in the game like this. I mean, once I have my D train, my runs are good, and they're just going to continue to pay out for the rest of the game. So I don't know if Dichu made the right decision here or not in terms of dumping the CPR. He may have lost the game either way, but I think dumping the CPR guarantees he loses. So yeah, Dichu, ton of cash, but not too many shares, will dump the CPR and buy the PRR. M. Galler is going to buy the PRR. PRR is a safe company, safe investment, so everyone is interested in that. I will sell a CNO to put myself yellow, which is painful, but it does allow me to buy 5 more shares in this stock round. And I will also buy a PRR. Deroge, he's going to buy the PRR. Dichu rounds it out with a last purchase of the PRR. M. Galler is going to buy the CPR. He's going to be the president there, so it makes sense to invest in it, but it doesn't make sense to invest into it early before you have to. You'd rather buy other people's shares that they're prioritizing than the CPR shares, I assume, since nobody's going to buy these shares. I buy the NYNH. I'm just looking for permanent or not permanent, safe shares to buy. The NYNH almost burned me earlier in the game, but now I'm feeling safe owning it because the Erie has $0, so it's going to be hard to buy this train out. And then also, realistically speaking, we've just criticized Dichu for selling shares. Where are you going to put your money if you were Deroge and you decide to dump the NYNH on me? There's just not going to be any shares to buy. So I feel safe investing there. Deroge is going to sell out of the CPR and buys the CNO. Dichu buying the Erie. This is the problem for Dichu is that, there's just not a lot of safe places for him to put his cash now that he's sold out of the CPR. M. Galler is going to continue buying the CPR. Everybody at the table is grateful that they are able to buy better shares as a result. Track Talk buying the B&O. That company is going to be the best company in the game. It's not attractive right now, of course, but it will be next operating round. Deroche is passing. Dichu, Erie, M. Galler, CPR, Track Talk, B&O. Dichu, Erie, M. Galler, CPR, Track Talk. So now I have to decide whether it makes sense to buy B&M share or not. As it stands, I would potentially have priority into the next stock round. Whether or not that's important is probably not true. At this stage in the game, I'm really not worried about dumps, and there's not going to be any shares to buy. But I do pass. Dichu's passing. M. Galler buys the B&M, which leaves me with priority. And everybody else passes. So at this point in operating 8.1, I think this game is wrapped up. There's basically no way I lose this game at this point. I will quickly run through it just to demonstrate that. But the fact of the matter is my share lead is too strong, and the train liability of buying this D train of the B&O is just not going to be enough to put me behind. So we'll move quickly through this. NYNH has no options left. It's just going to be paying for the rest of the game. B&O laying towards the west. Again, I'm going to get my run into Chicago to make the B&Os run better than every other company in the game. I buy the D, and if we just look at the net worths here, my train liability is satisfied. I trail Dichu by $600 or $500, and I'm neck and neck with all 3 of the other players, but I have a massive share lead, 4 shares on Deroge, 6 on Dichu, and 2 on M. Galler. M. Galler's shares are also not going to be paying in this operating round. So this is just not a high enough not a high enough net worth difference to justify the CPR dump. I will be able to overcome this. PRR, nothing doing. 240 for the rest of the game. Erie, 100 for the rest of the game. CPR will buy the train out of the NYC. Of course, if you're going to lose a run on a train, you'd rather lose the run on the 5 than the D. So that was well done from M. Galler. And now every company will be running for the rest of the operating rounds. B&M, nothing doing. Going to withhold there, and I'm not withholding because I need the cash. I'm withholding to keep it yellow because I want to start paying out on my more lucrative CNO. CNO almost linking up with Chicago. Paying NYC with the D train has a mediocre run of 280, less good than what you'd expect, and I think that's a consequence of missing out on the F18 upgrade and the token in New York. Operating around 8.2, NYNH doing nothing, PRR doing nothing, B&O is going to get the upgrade on Columbus and into Chicago, and that's going to bring my revenue up to 380, the best in the game. And from now on, I'm just trying to catch up to the other players. Deroge, nothing doing. CPR, nothing doing. NYC, nothing doing. CNO, I do have the opportunity of upgrading here so that I can optimize my 6 run from Baltimore through Cleveland into Chicago. Otherwise, I'd be running into Pittsburgh and Columbus or up into this double O. So just a slight justification here or modification here, and I'll be running for 210 or 240. B&M withholding again, just to stay yellow, and I'm going to improve my eventual revenue when I do start paying out by getting into this Maritime Providence. I token here just to neuter the CPR run to prevent it from getting runs into Boston. Final operating round in the set. We can blow through this very quickly. There's really not any interesting track left. You'll see that the B&O is setting up for a $10 increase in its revenue by hitting this DIT as well, but that's not going to have any relevance in the outcome of this game. B&M gets into the offboard. I'm still going to withhold to get yellow, and my revenue will increase by $30 because of this. So looking at the game state here, in terms of net worth, I'm still trailing Dichu by $400, but note I was down by $600 earlier. So even with all these withholds on the B&M, I am still gaining on him. And as soon as this B&M starts paying out, it's going to be not even close. I am ahead of Deroge and just narrowly trailing M. Gaylor, but the same logic holds for M. Gaylor as it does for Dichu. I have priority here, so I have my choice of shares to buy, and I'm noticing that the CPR cannot be bought by M. Galler, so I am safe in buying my yellow share, and then I will have an option to buy one of these CPR shares second, which will further increase my share lead on all the other players. So I buy the B&M. Deroche is going to buy the B&O since it's the best share in the game. Dichu has no option but to buy CPR. M. Geller, not only can he not buy the CPR, but he also has to sell a share. So I will be able to choose if I want the CPR or whatever share he sells. And he sells a CNO, which is kind of inexplicable because the revenue of the CNO is strictly higher than some of these other companies. But I'm very grateful to see that. So instead of buying the CPR, which would potentially open me up for a dump, I instead buy my CNO, which is safe. Deroche is going to buy the last share available, which is that CPR. And now there are no actions left for anybody in the stock round. So we can call this game. I'm going to call the game here just because nothing else interesting happens. But I will note that the bank actually doesn't break at the end of operating round 9. You would think it would because we're below that $6,000 heuristic. But I've actually been so successful in neutering the Erie that the bank barely survives. So I'm going to skip to the end of this set of operating rounds. And we can see that the bank very narrowly doesn't break, and I would have won the game if the game had ended there by a margin of about $200. There's literally nothing to be done in this stock round, and there's no interesting track development. So we will just skip to the end of the game here, which is going to, of course, give me a much higher margin of victory than would have otherwise happened if the bank had broken. But I do think it's a little bit of a misleading picture. I think the game was much closer than what this endgame state suggests. So in retrospect on this game, yes, I won. But no, I did not play well. The decision in that stock round to buy the CNO share and leave myself open to the NYNH dump very, very nearly lost me this game. I was only able to claw it back by the skin of the teeth with that emergency sell of the NYNH. So despite such a strong start with the auction being, handed to me on a silver platter, I very nearly lost this game, which does not bode well for my, future games in this tournament. I think that Dichu kind of killed his position in the game by dumping the CPR. Maybe he would have lost anyways, but I think he guaranteed it with that dump. I think that I targeted Deroge very heavily throughout this game and was able to shut down his Erie and neutralize him as a result. And then I think M. Gaylor just had numerous kind of fatal errors throughout this game that kneecapped his chances of winning from the very beginning. So I take it. I don't think any of the players played particularly well, but I played well enough to advance. All right, well, thanks for sitting through this analysis. We'll be back with additional tournament play as those games finish.